Welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Matthew Warren. We're talking about the French car industry on the day the government launches a plan to help the struggling sector. And to discuss this, I'm joined by Eric Saint-Frison. Eric spent 20 years working at the Ford Motor Company, and for the last 5 of those, he was both chairman and managing director of the company here in France. He's now the owner of 2 consulting companies, Go Between Conseil and Digital Dealer. Well, Eric, welcome to France 24. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for your invitation.
Let's get straight to it with the French car industry, because we've had a lot of announcements lately. The industry is facing a lot of challenges at the moment, and we've just been getting results from Peugeot Citroën of how they've been doing. They're struggling. They've already announced they're closing a plant. They're also cutting 8,000 jobs, and we've seen the share price collapse by 79% over the last year. Results were out this week showing a loss in the first half of over 800 million euros. So I just want to start by asking you, how do you think Peugeot Citroën has got into this situation?
If I had a totally clever answer, I would most probably be working at PSA and helping them to get out of the hole. The fact is that PSA used to be a very profitable corporation a year ago. The first half of 2011, they made more than 800 million euros profit, and they've lost about the same amount in the first semester of 2012. What has changed in a year? Not that much. The big change has happened within the Western European market decline, which impacted probably more strongly PSA than other manufacturers, because PSA relies a lot upon the French and the Western European market. And that's most probably the reason why they have been impacted that much in the beginning of the year. I'm not sure that there are a lot of other reasons, although that the fact that they are very dependent on small cars, which are cars which do not generate a lot unique per unit margin, very important. So they are most probably impacted by the combination of both dependence on small cars, small margins, and a market which has been in a reduction for a couple of months now.
And they're very exposed, they're very dependent on the European market, perhaps unlike some of their competitors. But the government and unions have also accused the company of making some serious strategic errors as well. What do you make of that argument?
It's almost obvious. If you're in a tough situation, it's because of former decisions. The automotive sector is a sector which is working on long time frames. It's not something which can be impacted short terms. It has to be on long time frames. So most probably the situation PSA is facing now is the consequence of decisions taken years ago. On the same explanation or kind of explanation, when the US market entered in troubles in 2008 and 2009, the main reason of their situation was the consequence of years of mistakes in the past. So most probably what they are facing now is coming from what has been decided years ago by another kind of management than the one which is operating the company today.
Do you think that the fact they're limited to this very tight market, as you said, they haven't expanded into, for example, the high-end luxury sector, or Renault, of course, is active in the low-cost sector? Has that been a real problem for them as well?
If you look at the European manufacturers in the globality, you will find a superb group, VW, which has an offering starting from the entry level with Seat and Skoda for the, let's say, average people, average consumer, and going up to Bugatti through Audi or Volkswagen, luxury brands. So having a portfolio of brands which allow to improve the per unit margin of vehicles sold. Other big groups, Renault with the Nissan Alliance, has a worldwide coverage in the market which is pretty broad, a product offer which is extremely large, have developed a couple of years ago a strategy starting with low-cost units with Dacia, produced in Central Europe, and going now up to luxury vehicles thanks to the Nissan luxury brand Infiniti. Fiat is having a strategy also abroad, which is interesting. South America, very strong in South America. And with the Chrysler partnership now, they have in North America also an interesting solution for developing other solutions. The problem of PSA is they are very French, very Western European oriented, and weak or still too weak abroad, especially in China or South America, where they have some presence, but not strong enough to compensate the difficulties they are facing in the European market.
Okay. Well, you talked there about some other European manufacturers and also other French manufacturers. And of course, we've now had a plan from the government to help the French car sector. It involves things like encouraging people to buy more eco-friendly cars. The government says that they themselves will buy more of those sorts of cars for their own service as well. I'm very interested to know, what do you make of the plan that the government has announced?
That's a tough question, because if you look at the reality of the French market for the past 22 years, you would see that the average registration market in France of passenger cars is around 2 million. Except in 2009, 10 and 11, where the market exploded up to 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 million units. In 2012, so now, it's going to most probably decline to 1.9. It's not a disastrous market. So the plan, which has been announced, in my opinion, is more oriented to help the French manufacturers to invest in new technologies to prepare the future than to help PSA or whoever to improve short-term performances. So technically, or in terms of research and development, it will give the French industry an interesting direction and most probably help them to invest in the right direction. It will not help PSA to get out of the difficulties in the short terms.
Okay. Now, one of the things we hear a lot, and PSA themselves have said this about the French market, is that the big problem is labour costs. Labour costs are too high in France. I'm interested, you worked in the industry, you dealt with this issue yourself. What do you think of that argument? Is it valid?
It's valid if you sell small cars. It means that the labour cost, the time you need to produce a vehicle, a small car, a medium car, or even a luxury car, doesn't change that much. It doesn't double the labor cost to produce a luxury car. The problem is that the proportion of the labor cost onto the retail price is too high if you produce in Western Europe small cars sold at reduced prices. And that's the reason why Renault went for low-cost production in Central Europe with Dacia years ago. So yes, the labor cost in France impact more PSA today because they produce low-priced cars with a proportion of labor cost which is too high. But on the other side, on the other hand, the labor costs in France are not higher than in Germany, and the difference is the fact that Germany sells, or German manufacturers sell, more expensive cars, so they absorb better the labor cost.
So you can afford to pay more if you're then selling for more. But it's interesting that some manufacturers, I'm thinking of Toyota here, you might have others as well, have chosen to put some of their car production in France. Why is that with these high labour costs? What is it that attracts people to France?
The only manufacturer which has elected France to produce cars in the past 10 years is Toyota, where they built near Valenciennes, the north of France, a plant to produce Yaris, small cars. The reason why they've done that is because in terms of exchange rate, Japan at the time they decided was penalized by the yen-euro value, or at the time, yen-French francs value. So it was a decision to compensate the exchange rate, the bad exchange rate the yen had versus the European currencies. Secondly, they had a huge logistic cost to bring small cars, small-priced cars in Europe from Japan. So it was a rational decision. And recently they've decided to put in this Valenciennes plant the Yaris hybrid version to be then exported to the US. Because in terms, again, of productivity and cost of final vehicle, the final cost of the vehicle brought to the US, it was cheaper to produce here in France and sent to the US, since the plant in Valenciennes is only occupied at 70%. So they have 30% of production capacity which are not used. So they had very limited investment to be made to produce modern cars, high technology, with a good labor competency from the workers in France and in Valenciennes in particular. So it was an interesting decision, but not a revolution.
Okay. Well, we have not very long left, but I'm just interested to know, if we look 10 years ahead from now, how do you think the French car-making sector might look?
It will have to be different. It will have to be more technology-oriented, to be able to explain the consumer that they are paying for something which costs more because it's produced locally, because the technology needs to be controlled by experts. And it will have to be most probably sourced from low-cost countries for small vehicles or low-equipped vehicles to allow French consumers to pay the right price for a mobility they need, but not a luxury mobility and a useful mobility, should I say.
Okay. Well, that's thanks very much for sharing your thoughts with us on the French car industry today. And thanks to you very much for watching us here on the interview on France 24.